Right, this is my reflection on week 7 and 8 in my Educating Diverse Populations course. So the sources for these past 2 weeks have been plentiful and extremely informative on two topics that are often pinned against each other as antagonisms, which is free expression in gender and sexual orientation and religion. I enjoyed zeroing in on the complexities of education as it is experienced by students whose identities are in the minority in a society dominated by heteronormative Christian values and persistent binaries. Specifically, the adversities experienced by trans and non binary students, as well as Muslim students in a post 9/11 world, are critical to understanding the responsibilities schools and teachers have in giving these students a safe and inclusive education. Since we live in an unequal society where male, white, and Christian supremacy dominate our values, sexism, sexual and gender based violence, homophobia, and transphobia are direct manifestations and consequences of America's bigotry. So, how do we combat these narratives in a democratic and responsive way in our classrooms when we will likely have students learning from across the spectrum? Bullying of LGBTQ students is widespread across the country, and almost every state is chiming in on the argument of whether trans girls should be allowed to play on women's sports teams or use their preferred bathrooms in high schools. In Payne and Smith's paper on rethinking safe school approaches for LGBTQ students, they critique the dominant methods that schools utilize to stop bullying. Schools are narrowly focused on punishing individual acts of queerphobia, while some schools might not even do this much. But this leads them to falsely assuming that the amount of bullying behaviors they address corresponds with how safe LGBTQ students feel. This doesn't account for instances of bullying that go unreported and that reprimanding behavior isn't always enough for the perpetrator to be convinced to stop. Thus, the underlying problem is not individual bullies, their aggression, or individual family histories that might make them that way, but they must be understood as symptoms of a larger systemic flaw that marginalizes students and places others in positions of privilege. Gender norms are taught and ingrained in us from elementary school, and though youth are taught to be kind and respectful to their peers early on, the tendency to police these peers based on what is considered the acceptable way to behave based on gender intensifies as they enter junior and high school. It is therefore important to examine how schools institutionalize heterosexuality and end up supporting social positioning practices that privilege idealized heterosexual performance. At high schools, this could look like, for example, publicly constructed formal activities such as homecoming and prom king and queen, school dances, and voting for the cutest couple as a superlative. Educators should be trained on the link between bullying and enforced heteronormative gender norms, and schools as a whole should inquire how they can prevent bullying rather than wait for it to occur and punish individual bullies. And kindergarteners taught me about gender. Green Walk provides an example of a facilitated class discussion where students described what girls and boys like and do. It doesn't take them long to decipher that these gender norms don't actually fit them and that it's okay that they don't. Young children are thought to have no filter when it comes to their honest observations, and I think this is due to not being fully aware or assimilated or immersed into the world that polices their gender, race, sexual orientation, etc. Older students have come acquainted with their existence among these societal binaries, but they can still be taught new information that challenge how they treat these differences among their peers. I think Greenwalk's class discussion should be replicated in older grades too and modified to be more mature and age appropriate. People born within Gen Z, which is the generation of 1997 to 2012, are emboldened about gender identity, believing innately that gender is fluid and that people don't all fit within the arbitrary binary of man versus woman. The employment of more male teachers in early childhood education could also assist in breaking down gender norms and exposing students to more representation. And I also believe that addressing how girls may face invisible biases, stereotypes, and harassment that follows them after school graduation can help the greater cause of improving education outcomes for girls, boys, and those students who don't identify within a binary or with their assigned sex at birth. I think that many issues in the classroom we've discussed so far in this class, such as how to address race, language, culture, gender, socioeconomic status, would greatly benefit from class-wide discussion. Religion, on the other hand, seems to require a more subtle approach where any lessons that might conflict with religious beliefs I think they should be taught neutrally and as unbiased as possible. The science teacher at Were You There, Terry Wortman, clearly made a lasting effect on Wamsley, a former 10th grade student who originally protested evolution on the basis of her creationist beliefs. Years later, she came to terms with the falsehoods that her religion promoted and realized the validity of what she learned from her teacher. In Feminist Atheist, Rendon describes her breakthrough from her Catholic religion as the realization that the beliefs that were sown into her religious upbringing were used as justifications to hate queer people, uphold male supremacy and sexism, and condemn anyone who doesn't believe in Jesus. Religion should be practiced with the aim of liberation of all people, but instead it is often used as a basis of control. I do wish Rendon luck in employing her atheist feminism to the cause of combating sexism in religious institutions. It's definitely a big stride, and as an atheist, I'm definitely a little more skeptical of the possibility of that, but um, I definitely really liked those specific articles and kind of hearing the point of view from a religious student or previously religious students. But a recurring question that popped in my head while reading a lot of these sources was, how do teachers facilitate class discussions as welcome, safe spaces after high-profile current events occur? Specifically thinking how teachers dealt with when Donald Trump won the presidential election, despite having active sexual allegations and soon after placing an unconstitutional travel ban on Muslims. Schools struggle with addressing their own individual instances of sexual assault between students and even between students and teachers with the limitations and weaknesses of Title IX protection. Survivors should be given the space to speak out and have their abusers held accountable while also playing a role in deciding equitable consequences for the acts committed. Should the student who committed the assault be kicked out of school, placed in online classes, or face litigation? Should we send bullies to the principal's office? I'm a firm believer in restorative justice practices, and I would love to see how they could be employed in instances of sexual harassment, bullying, and other forms of harm that students inflict on each other at school. I really like the Wikipedia explanation of the term. Restorative justice is an approach to justice that aims to get offenders to take responsibility for their actions, to understand the harm they have caused, to give them an opportunity to redeem themselves, and to discourage them from causing further harm. For victims or survivors, its goal is to give them an active role in the process and to reduce feelings of anxiety and powerlessness. Educators can employ restorative justice in their classrooms by leading sharing circles as preventative measures and acting as a mediator when a student breaks a rule or commits an act that goes against the collective student agreement set by everyone. The teacher or mediator asks non-judgmental questions and allows the offending student to answer and redeem themselves. The class collectively comes up with a plan, the offender commits to the plan, and this hopefully results in the building and repair of relationships. This would be a refreshing alternative to penalizing students via detentions, suspensions, and even expulsions, because it attacks the problem at the root while still honoring the humanity and potential of the offender with the aim of keeping them in the school community. The hatred and ridicule that students face for their Sikh, Muslim, or any religion that isn't the dominant faith in this country is enough for me to want to understand a minimum of the core beliefs of each religion. The teacher that didn't react or offer more guidance when Singh's turban was used as a nose tissue had the power to make or break how safe and understood Singh felt in that class. 50% of Sikh children face bullying, and that figure jumps to 67% if they choose to wear a turban. I strongly agree with Singh that if teachers are singling out 7-year-olds to teach their class about their faith unrehearsed to their peers, they need better training. I've saved Singh's recommended resources for teachers and will keep his story in mind on my teaching journey. I don't have too much time left to share my thoughts, but I also loved the Growing Up Muslim in America article and how Abdulbari highlights sexist double standards and breaks down common stereotypes in her faith. A collective theme for the sources on Muslim students was emphasizing that ISIS is not part of their faith, and they desire to teach their peers what their faith really is about. At the end of the day, we all just want to be accepted for who we are. The prayer room might not be a top resource I would advocate for, but I would support it in a school if the intentions are to include everyone. Hyphenated selves drew important points in the differences of how Islamophobia is experienced by boys and girls, and Professor Tapley offered an excellent point in their lecture of Week 8. The feelings of anger, despair, and lack of belonging to either country may inspire radicalization in Muslim boys and the desire to join movements like ISIS or turn to domestic terrorism, much like inner city youth turn to gang membership. A quality teacher that leads with cultural inclusion and does everything to make students feel safe could directly combat this trajectory for some students. In the same fashion, it doesn't take much for educators to show their students that they belong and they are in charge of their learning. The rest flows from students who are empowered and encouraged to be leaders of their own stories instead of remaining perpetual victims of a dehumanizing capitalist society. Thank you.